This video differs from my usual content in that it's a recording of me doing a figure drawing in pen and ink in real time, accompanied by nothing more than explanatory text. This is really an addendum to my tutorial on the cross-contour hatching technique and will be useful to those that want a more in-depth look at my process. I recommend you watch that video first, since it'll give you a general introduction to contour cross-hatching and will make it easier to follow what I'm doing here. I'm going to go through the process of sketching in the figure with a graphite pencil and then show you my process of inking it. Figure drawing is a vast topic, and I'm only going to be able to touch on it briefly. If you'd like to see a more detailed explanation of how I draw the figure, I have plenty of figure drawing tutorials on my channel for you to peruse. Before we begin, I just want to say that drawing in pen and ink is probably the most challenging way to draw. My advice is to think of mistakes as inevitable and part of the process. Small mistakes, a stray line here or messy hatching in spots, will not ruin a drawing, and in fact can give a drawing a stronger sense of spontaneity and expressiveness. And large mistakes are simply an opportunity to learn and make a better drawing in the future. Treat every drawing as practice for the next one, and you'll find yourself more relaxed and able to do better work. The drawing in this video is of course far from perfect, but it's better than my two previous versions, better than this one, and better than this one. But it's not better than the very last one I did off camera. This is just to show you that we all make mistakes, even when you've been at this for a very long time, but also that sometimes you have to do a few bad drawings to arrive at something that's better. At the end of this video, I'm going to go over this drawing, show you what I did right and what I could have done better, and then compare it to my previous two efforts and show you why those efforts were worse, and then I'll show you the subsequent effort, which was slightly better. Now, unfortunately, I'm not going to be able to post my reference while I'm drawing. Hopefully, as this channel grows, I'm going to be able to pay models for this purpose, and this is something that I'll be able to do in the future. Okay, here we go. I'm going to stop talking now and start the recording. Here's the completed drawing. Let's take a look at it and see what I did right and what could have been done better. The overall gesture looks pretty good. The plumb line that I drew in pencil at the beginning of the drawing that starts from this little spot, the 7th cervical, and runs all the way through the feet really did a fantastic job in helping me with this. The proportions aren't too bad either. I managed to avoid some of my more frequent mistakes, one of them being that I make the distance from the knee to the heel too long. This is the main reason why I do a pencil underdrawing. It allows me to get those really big proportional and gestural issues out of the way before inking. I do occasionally draw without that pencil underdrawing, but the chances of me making really big mistakes increases dramatically. A few things could have been better when it comes to the cross-hatching. One of the rules is to make your cross-hatching of a consistent gauge, meaning that your hatch marks should be about the same distance apart throughout your drawing. And I managed to do that for the most part, except for right about here, this shadow under the hair. This patch has a thicker line and a wider gauge so that it starts looking a little more like texture and less like value. There's a few other places where I made that same mistake. Let's take a look, maybe right here. Maybe here you can see that the gauge is a little bit wider. Right, you can see it creates kind of like this scraping effect, this texture effect, as opposed to looking like value. The other mistake I made was to make the shadow transitions a little too sharp in places. Right about here, that's definitely too sharp. This transition is definitely too sharp. Perhaps here. Here it's okay because the turn of form is pretty abrupt, which creates almost like an angle in these places. Now, a mistake like this can be fixed fairly easily simply by extending a little bit of halftone into the light and softening the shadow transition. Now, there's also the issue of some of my core shadows going a little bit too dark and punching through the form. So right about here it's going too dark. Here maybe going a little bit too dark. Maybe some of the core shadows here are going a little bit too dark. Perhaps I pushed the contrast just a little bit too much, and you can see that the line is starting to punch through, and look like some kind of groove, a depression, as opposed to a core shadow. Now, if you remember, you can lighten your core shadows, some of your darkest darks, a little bit with a hard eraser. In fact, why don't we give this a try? Let's try it. So I've got a eraser holder here. Let's see if we can lighten some of the core shadows. Let's see if that actually does anything. I don't know if you can tell, but I think it's a little bit better. Where else? Let's see, maybe here a little bit. Right, where it's going just a little bit too dark. Yeah, that seems to help a little bit. So overall, not a bad effort, but definitely not my best. The hatching is a little bit messy in places and a little bit confused in places as well because of the application of too many layers. But in some places I think I did a pretty good job of conserving my strokes, such as the way I render the arm here. Right, the glutes here, not too badly done. I do wish I spent a little bit more time on the hair. It looks a little bit unfinished, but having a consistent degree of finish is not a requirement, and sometimes leaving some parts just sketched in or trailing off into white paper looks pretty nice. Now let's take a look at my two previous efforts and see why they are possibly worse than the one I did here. This is the first one I did, and while the hatching isn't bad, and in some ways is even cleaner than the one from the demo, in other ways this drawing is just a mess. The biggest mistake I made was not capturing the tilt of the hips correctly. In this contrapposto pose, the hips need to be tilted more, and I really screwed it up. The lesson is to take the time in the construction phase and make sure the gesture and proportions are absolutely spot on. So long as you get those two things right, small mistakes in rendering will be forgivable. But no amount of rendering, no matter how well done, will correct for a mistake in gesture or proportion. That said, some of the rendering here is actually cleaner and more effective than the demo drawing, with a better conservation of strokes, meaning that I got more done with less layers of hatch. The transitions are more effective in some places, so it's a little bit softer and more gradual, more rounded looking here, though I screwed up and covered up this area of light. There's also a mistake in the hair with the gauge suddenly becoming wider and beginning to look more like texture rather than value. Okay, now let's take a look at the second drawing that I did. This one again suffers from the same gestural mistake. In retrospect, I'm not sure why I was struggling with this so much, and as a figure drawing instructor, I must say it's pretty embarrassing. These two little depressions here and here are where the sacrum transitions into the posterior iliac crest. They give a very good indication of the tilt of the hips, and I should have noted the angle between them and tilted the hips more this way. Oh well, but as I said, sometimes you have to do a few bad drawings to get to a better one, and this drawing, though probably even worse than my very first effort, made me focus on the gesture more in my next drawing. Okay, here's the very last drawing I did off camera. By the way, I think it's good practice to try drawing the same pose several times. You should always try to learn from your mistakes every time you draw, and the easiest way to apply those lessons is to try drawing the same subject more than once. Here are a few examples where I repeatedly draw the same subject. This one and this one. This one and this one. Now, in this last drawing, I did a better job getting the gesture right with that extreme, almost uncomfortable tilt to the right. I was also better about being consistent with hatching in terms of the gauge, the distance between the lines, so the hatching turns into texture in fewer places. I also did a better job getting the transitions from light to shadow to be softer, and the hatching is far less messy, meaning again that I used fewer layers to get a finished drawing. Also, notice that my core shadows aren't too dark and punching through the form quite as much, with a few exceptions of course. What else? Oh, I also did a better job rendering the hair by indicating the shadow side here so that the head doesn't feel flat. Overall, a better attempt than my previous 3 efforts. I attribute these slight improvements to the fact that it's my 4th attempt, but really the main difference is that I drew it off camera. That allowed me to take extra time and make sure my initial construction and proportions were right. It also allowed me to rotate the paper with greater frequency, which improved the quality of my hatching. It also let me really lean into the drawing to get a more comfortable drawing position, since I didn't have to worry that my head would block the camera. And of course, I was much more relaxed since I wasn't recording. So I think some progress was made by drawing this pose 4 times, though it's not always the case that your very last effort will be your best. Overall, however, a pen and ink drawing in many ways is similar to a piano performance. They're rarely, if ever, perfect, but so long as most of the elements are done well, a few missed notes will not ruin it. Furthermore, when you're hearing the performance, you forget that what you're hearing is the combination of hours and hours of playing poorly. It's the same in drawing. In order to make a good drawing, you have to also make a few bad drawings. So long as you learn from those bad drawings, the time spent on them is not wasted, but is actually an essential part of the process. If you maintain that mindset, your mistakes will never frustrate you, and it will just motivate you to just give it another try. I hope you found this very long video useful. If you enjoyed it and would like to see similar videos on other subjects, please let me know. And if you're bored to death by it, then my apologies. Thanks for watching, and of course, if you have any questions or comments, leave them below and I'll be happy to respond.